My name is Serena Blake, and for 15 years, I believed in the safety of routine, the comfort of predictability. My husband, Lucas, was charming, successful, the kind of man people admired. We had built a life that seemed perfect, a beautiful home, thriving careers, weekend getaways, quiet nights with movies and wine. But I learned that perfection is fragile, and appearances are often deceiving. It started subtly. A glance too long at his phone, a vague excuse for late nights, the way he would sometimes tense when I walked into the room. I told myself it was nothing, a stress, work, fatigue, but a quiet alarm was growing inside me. The unease I felt was persistent, gnawing at the edges of my mind. And yet, I ignored it. I wanted to believe in the man I had married, the man who had once whispered promises under starlit skies. Our anniversary was approaching. 10 years, a decade of shared dreams. Lucas suggested a celebration at the Apex, the city's most exclusive rooftop restaurant, where glass walls revealed a skyline ablaze with lights. I dressed carefully, wearing a dark emerald dress, elegant but understated. Lucas looked impeccable as usual, tailored suit, a crisp tie, cologne that reminded me of our honeymoon. He smiled when I approached, but it didn't reach his eyes. Something about his expression made my stomach twist. "Happy anniversary, Serena," he said, raising his glass of red wine. "To us," I replied, clinking my glass with his. But the cheer felt hollow. Something in the rhythm of his gestures, the set of his jaw, screamed of secrets hidden too well. As we sat down, I noticed his eyes darting repeatedly to his phone, his fingers drumming nervously against the table. I tried to engage him in conversation, asking about his day, mentioning trivial things, anything to feel connected. He responded in short, clipped sentences. "Same old," he said. "Busy." There was a coldness I couldn't ignore, a shadow where warmth once lived. Over the past few months, this had become our life, a house filled with the presence of a man whose attention was elsewhere, a marriage that was increasingly one-sided. A week before our anniversary, I discovered a second phone hidden in his briefcase. It had been wiped clean, no contacts, no messages, just a blank screen staring back at me. I confronted him. He smiled thinly, claiming it was an old work phone, nothing to worry about. But I didn't believe him. Something deep in my gut told me I was being played. That night at the Apex, I excused myself, claiming a sudden need for fresh air. The city breeze was cold, the lights twinkling below like distant stars. I leaned against the railing, heart pounding, when I heard a quiet voice behind me. "Serena, a broken bar. I'm sorry to bother you." I turned. A young waitress, no older than 20, stood there, eyes wide with urgency. "I need to tell you something." "I saw him. A broken bar. Your husband. A broken bar. He put something in your wine." Time stopped. I wanted to think she was wrong, that she had misunderstood. But every instinct screamed at me to listen. She explained that when I had stepped away, she had seen Lucas drop a powder into my glass. I froze, feeling a cold fear settle over me. Not just fear for my life, but shock at the betrayal of the man I trusted, the man I had shared a life with, plotting against me. When I returned to the table, I moved casually, sliding the glasses, taking his intended wine in my hand while pretending to sip mine. Lucas didn't notice. He continued typing on his phone, oblivious, or perhaps too confident that his plan would succeed. It wasn't long before the effects became clear. He coughed violently, his face pale, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. His hand reached for the wrong glass, spilling it across the table, crimson against the white linen. Panic erupted around us, and I shouted for help. Within minutes, paramedics were on the scene, and Lucas was rushed to the hospital, his own scheme having backfired in the most ironic way. The weeks that followed were surreal. I combed through his office, uncovering hidden financial documents, emails, and records that painted a picture of long-term deception, manipulation, and greed. The man I had loved, the man who had promised me forever, had been living a double life, planning to erase me from both his business and my life. Every detail was calculated, every step deliberate. The hospital smelled sterile and unfeeling, a cold reality pressing in. Lucas was under sedation, monitored by machines that beeped rhythmically, each sound echoing in my chest like a judgment. I sat in a plastic chair, dress wrinkled from the earlier chaos, my hands trembling as I held a lukewarm cup of coffee. My mind raced, piecing together months of odd behavior, secret meetings, late-night calls, and hidden documents. Each memory now fit into a terrifying puzzle. I wasn't sure whether to feel relief or rage. Relief, because I had survived. Rage, because the man I had loved, trusted, and built a life with had tried to end me, and not just me, he had aimed to take control of everything I had worked for. The thought was almost unbearable. My company, my home, my financial independence, all had been at risk. Lucas's plan wasn't a moment of madness, it was a calculated strategy, executed with chilling precision. Days passed in a blur. The police were involved, but the weight of truth sat heavier on me than any interrogation or testimony could. I began to comb through his office, filing cabinets, and hidden compartments. There were letters from banks warning about risky investments, emails detailing offshore accounts, unsigned contracts that could have granted him access to my company if I were incapacitated. He had meticulously planned not just to harm me physically but to dismantle my life completely. And then came the subtle betrayals I hadn't seen before, the way he had turned friends into informants, the way colleagues whispered, fearful of his charm and influence. People who had once admired us both now looked at me with a mixture of pity and curiosity, as if the fall of Lucas Blake was a spectacle I had no control over. Through it all, I realized something important. I was no longer the passive woman I had been, the one who tolerated cold shoulders and secretive behavior. I had survived, and in surviving, I found a clarity I had never known. I began keeping meticulous records, dates, interactions, receipts, emails, every little piece of evidence that painted the true picture. One evening, a knock at my office door startled me. It was Sarah, the young waitress who had saved my life. She stepped in, nervous but determined, holding a small folder of her own. "A broken bar, I kept some notes," she said quietly. "I noticed patterns, things he did with clients, the way he behaved at the restaurant. A broken bar, I thought it might help." I studied her. She was nervous but alert, sharp. I realized in that moment that the same instincts that had saved me could guide others too. Together, we began piecing together the timeline of Lucas's deceit. Every dinner, every business trip, every odd comment he had made now had context, a sinister pattern that had been hidden in plain sight. Then the legal world moved quickly. Lucas was charged not only with attempted poisoning but also with financial fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. His lawyer tried to frame it as a moment of panic under pressure, a mental lapse. But I had lived in the house with him for 15 years. I knew the difference between instability and meticulous intent. He had been calculating, patient, and manipulative. He had believed he could outthink me, underestimate me, and erase me from the equation entirely. Court dates began to pile up. Lucas's confident demeanor, once so disarming, now seemed forced, even desperate. He glared at me across the courtroom more than once, a thin mask of anger barely hiding panic. I learned to maintain my composure. I spoke when necessary, letting the evidence do the talking. Letters, emails, financial records, witness statements from clients all pointed to a man who had thought he was untouchable, only to discover that his own schemes had been undone by a single act of vigilance. And yet, healing wasn't immediate. I slept poorly, waking in the night with flashes of the restaurant, the glasses, the wine. Every clink of a cup, every hurried whisper, made me flinch. Therapy became a refuge, a place where I could untangle fear from instinct, paranoia from reality. Slowly, I began to reclaim my life. I reconnected with colleagues who believed in me, strengthened my business, and nurtured my sense of self-worth. There were moments of guilt too, and the realization that love had once blinded me, that trust had been exploited. But I refused to let guilt define me. Lucas's betrayal had been immense, but my survival proved something stronger: resilience. I began sharing my story with small circles, then larger ones, speaking about intuition, about trusting the quiet voice inside that tells you something is wrong. Women reached out to me, strangers mostly, thanking me for validation, for proof that listening to instincts can save lives. In the background, Sarah became more than an assistant, she became my ally. Together, we developed systems to track business integrity, to spot deception before it could escalate. The girl who had whispered a warning in a restaurant hallway was now a professional, sharp, and fearless. Watching her grow reminded me that one act of courage could ripple outward, changing lives in ways that fear alone never could. Lucas's trial drew national attention. Headlines blared about the investment star attempted poisoning, about the fall of a financial genius. But I stayed removed from the spectacle. My story wasn't about scandal. It was about survival, clarity, and justice. Every piece of evidence I presented, every statement I gave, reminded me that truth is stronger than charm, resilience stronger than deceit. Months passed, and the courtroom became my second home. Each day, Lucas sat across from me, a man who had once seemed untouchable now diminished, his arrogance stripped away by truth and evidence. He tried to smile at me during one hearing, a flicker of charm that once would have softened my defenses. Now, it bounced harmlessly off the armor I had built around myself. I didn't flinch, didn't falter. I only watched. The prosecution laid out every piece of his plan, every document, every email, every witness testimony. It was meticulous, overwhelming, undeniable. And I realized, with a strange calm, that I wasn't testifying just for myself. I was testifying for every woman, every person who had been silenced by manipulation, fear, or deceit. Lucas had believed he could erase me, render me powerless, but my voice was louder than any lie he could spin. Outside the courtroom, life slowly returned. I restructured my company, fortified its finances, and implemented new measures to protect my clients, my team, and myself. Sarah proved invaluable, her instincts sharp, her dedication unwavering. Together, we began mentoring young professionals in business ethics, personal safety, and recognizing subtle manipulation before it could take root. Every workshop, every seminar, every shared story reminded me that survival isn't just about avoiding harm, it's about reclaiming power and using it to help others. Then came the final verdict. Lucas was convicted on multiple charges: attempted poisoning, financial fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. The judge's words were precise, cutting through the courtroom silence. The defendant meticulously planned to harm the victim and manipulate her assets. Justice is served. I felt a weight lift, a tension I hadn't realized had held me for months. Relief mixed with something more profound: triumph. Not over Lucas, not over the courtroom, but over fear, over doubt, over the paralysis that could have ended my life. I left the courthouse that day with a sense of clarity I had never known. The sky outside was crisp and bright, a stark contrast to the gray despair of the months before. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. My future wasn't tied to the man who had betrayed me, it was entirely mine. In the months that followed, I dedicated myself to rebuilding not just my company, but my sense of self. I traveled, attended conferences, spoke on panels, and shared my story to help others recognize danger before it became irreversible. I worked with nonprofits focused on women's empowerment, financial literacy, and personal safety. Each time someone approached me after a speech, eyes wide, thanking me for helping them see the warning signs in their own lives, I realized the impact of courage, the kind I had learned to wield under the glare of danger. Sarah grew into her own professional identity, earning accolades and respect in the business world. Watching her succeed reminded me that a single act of courage, her decision to warn me that night, had not only saved my life but had shaped the future of someone else. It was proof that bravery, no matter how small it seems at the time, creates ripples far beyond its moment. And me? I finally felt safe, grounded, and in control. I no longer questioned my instincts or minimized the quiet warnings of my intuition. I had learned the difference between love and fear, trust and manipulation. I had learned that survival isn't passive, it is active, deliberate, and demanding. And most importantly, I had learned that reclaiming your life after betrayal doesn't just restore what was lost, it creates something stronger, something unshakable. Sometimes, late at night, I still replay that evening at the Crescent. I remember the glittering lights, the rich taste of wine, the subtle shift in Ethan's demeanor or Lucas's demeanor, the man who had tried to destroy me. But now, I see it not as a night of fear, but as the moment I discovered my own strength. That night didn't define me. My response to it did. I built a life that wasn't dictated by fear or manipulation. I nurtured relationships built on trust and respect. I mentored others to recognize danger, to honor their instincts, and to step into their own power. I became a voice for those who had been silenced, a living example that courage isn't always loud, it can be quiet, deliberate, and life-saving. And so, I live each day with intention. I don't dwell on what could have happened, I focus on what I've built, the lessons I've learned, and the people I've empowered along the way. Love, once naive and untested, is now informed and deliberate. Trust is no longer blind, it is earned and reciprocated. I am Serena Blake. I survived. I reclaimed my life. I turned betrayal into clarity, danger into strength, and fear into action. And if my story reaches even one person, gives them the courage to listen to that quiet voice in their gut, then every sleepless night, every heartbeat of panic, every moment of uncertainty was worth it. This is not just my story. It is a story of survival, vigilance, and empowerment. It is proof that even in the darkest moments, we hold the power to choose life, strength, and clarity over fear, silence, and destruction. And that choice, once made, can change everything.